Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Traci Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. This is probably the most interesting episode that I have ever done because I know that most of the guests, I think, that I've had on before have been pretty aligned with like HR and what we do. But this week, I actually have Dan Goodman, who is the counter to HR. And he's the counter to HR because he advocates for employees when they don't have anyone else to depend on. And often when there are, unfortunately, HR professionals who really are not doing the right thing in businesses or are doing things that they believe are the right way to go about things and therefore not supporting employees. So it might be a little divisive. Some people might, get, I don't know, maybe even a little defensive when they're listening, but I think that's okay because this is, Dan, you're probably the first voice that we have had on this podcast who really challenges us to think differently about HR, about what we do, who we are, and reminds us that unfortunately there are practitioners out there who do live up to some of these stigmas. So I'm going to introduce Dan so everyone knows who you are and what you do. So Dan Goodman has dedicated his life to standing up for people who need help. He prides himself on being unafraid to speak the truth and empowering others to advocate for themselves. For decades, people have been conditioned to believe that they are at the mercy of their employer and that their company holds all of the power in the relationship. Dan challenges that notion every day. What started as Dan helping a few people he cared about in disputes with their employers has turned into Dan Goodman Employment Advisory, DGEA. A veteran of corporate America himself, Dan has seen company games and tactics, inside and out. In the business world, he held senior positions in cybersecurity, enterprise software, and executive consulting. At DGEA, he has successfully helped over 2,000 people during critical interactions with their employer. Bringing over 30 plus years of experience to his passion, DGEA was formed. The company launched February 2023 and has served over 800 plus clients since its inception. Dan combines his extensive experience, empathy, and business acumen into a unique approach that helps employees navigate the challenges of corporate life. Prior to DGEA, Dan launched True Commish in 2019, a service that allows any salesperson to audit their own commissions. At True Commish, Dan helped top-performing salespeople successfully reclaim hundreds of thousands of dollars from their employers. To this day, True Commish remains a free resource for anyone to use for a review of their commissions or new sales compensation plans. Dan also has an MBA in entrepreneurial studies from Babson College and a BBA in finance from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Dan has also been married to his lovely wife for 32 years and has 3 children. He's an avid fan of Boston sports, which we won't get into since I'm a New York sports fan, but I'm not a Yankee fan, so we can agree on that.
Well, then it was a good night last night then.
Yeah, it was a good night for everyone but the Yankees, exactly. He also cherishes summers and golf on Cape Cod. Oh, lovely, love that. And loves a morning walk with his beloved furry companion, Sawyer. So Dan, welcome. And I'm so excited that we have a counter to HR officially on the podcast.
Well, Traci, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here. I just wanted to make one little edit to the introduction. We are now up to almost 1,800 clients helping DGA since we started 2 Februaries ago.
That's
so really
amazing.
excited about
Congratulations.
that. I got to update the website. Thank you.
Well, you've been busy growing by more than 1,000 clients, so I can understand why it's not 100% updated. That's amazing. Well, kudos to you. And I think for anyone that is a reasonable person and especially a good HR practitioner, I think anyone that is out to help employees during difficult times or during changes or navigating changes, I think that's a really wonderful thing because we're going to get into this, but there are a lot of things that happen to employees over the course of or the span of an employee life cycle that don't always feel so great. And those moments, if you have an advocate or if you have someone that you can rely on, whether inside the organization or outside, I think that's a great thing. So with that, maybe we should just dive right in. tell us a little bit about where this term or phrase like counter HR came from and why this advocating for employees is your mission.
Well, the term actually came from a client that I was working with before I even formally started the business. I was basically helping people for about 6 months at no charge, just to sort of navigate and review severances and things like that. So they kind of said, you know what, you really are like a counter to HR. And I loved it and it stuck. So I kept that on my banner. I'm just someone who always likes to challenge things. I was... if you ask something, you're told because it just rubs me the wrong way. It always has since I was a kid. And I just think that everyone deserves transparency and honesty and fairness and playing off the same page. And I really hate it when people are taken advantage of based on misinformation or intentional lack of information. So that's kind of why I was shocked about the landscape and how employers have taken advantage of employees for so long. And I wanted to step up and be that advocate and resource for people to not have to go at it alone.
I agree. I think that's awesome. And, you're right. There are so many, and there unfortunately are still so many examples of people being taken advantage of in the workforce. And this is where these stigmas come from, especially with colleagues of mine in the industry. I mean, I've shared on my podcast before in the early stages that some of the best learning lessons that I'd ever received throughout my career were from moments where I interacted with HR leaders I never wanted to be like. And so we know that those stigmas are real. Like the whole reason I started this podcast was because I've found that there was a major gap and a major issue between what I believe we're supposed to do for employees, which is very aligning, I think, with your mission, and what many HR practitioners often do or feel they have to do. And so I'm curious, I know when you and I spoke offline, we talked a lot about really how employees can navigate layoff moments, severance, and things like that. And I bring it up because we are in the midst of a layoff series on my podcast. And so you are actually closing out this series for us because naturally severance and separation agreements are the last step, unfortunately, in a layoff process. But I know that one of the things that you do support employees with in DGEA is navigating their severance, navigating the terms of their separation agreements. What are some things that you often see that are examples of people potentially being taken advantage of? And counter to that, what are some things that you often advise people look out for or do if they are in the midst of this process to receive a severance once they sign a separation agreement?
Absolutely. The first and most important thing is to really understand what severance is about and why it's offered. It's literally misrepresented in a massive way. The employee has something the employer seeks and is willing to pay a lot of money for. Thousands, tens of thousands. I've had clients who've gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars for signing their severance agreement. So the first thing is to sort of level the playing field, to be on the same playing field. That you have something the employer seeks, your name on a release of liability and claims, your promise to never sue. In essence, once you sign a severance, it's as if you never existed to the company. You're giving up all your rights and all your claims. They present it as the opposite. They present it as they're doing you a favor, that they care, they feel bad, they're helping you transition. It couldn't be further from the truth. They do it for their own selfish reasons to have you sign a release of claims. And once you do, you didn't exist. So the first thing is let's get on the same playing field. Let's understand what the game is, why they offer severance, who benefits from it, and then attempt to negotiate from that stance. So that would be the very first thing, is that most people don't understand why they offer severance, who benefits from it. They don't even know that you can negotiate it. A majority of people don't even know that you can negotiate it. And they've been conditioned to think this way. It's a lack of information, misinformation that's purposely provided. So, as far as how to prepare for it, if you know that a termination is coming, I say start building a case to respond to it. If it's a legitimate termination and it's just, business has been bad and they need to lay some people off and there's no nefarious actions that are driving it behind the scenes, that you're being included in a rift that you might not be otherwise, then that's okay. These things have to happen. And hopefully your employer will give you a decent severance package and you'll go off and sign it and be done. But the people who come to me, it's often not the case that they shouldn't have been included in the RIF, or they've been targeted, or they've been retaliated against, or this is being done because they've gone on too much paternity leave and used the benefits that they want to promote as being a great progressive company. But if you use them too much, then then there's a problem here. I've heard that many, many times. I've worked with 50, 60 different people around a parental leave being retaliated against for taking too much of it. So yeah, I mean, those are the things that, be prepared, gather your information, understand, if there are nefarious reasons behind your termination, what they are, call it out. If you're working in a toxic work environment, describe what's going on so that it's not your word versus their word. It's you've built out a compelling case of a dozen different examples of how you've been treated unfairly, unevenly, in a discriminatory way, in a bullying, and a toxic way. So,
yeah, I can appreciate what you're saying. I mean, I fortunately have never worked for an employer where I've had to make a decision or terminate someone for nefarious reasons. And I can say pretty confidently that if I was ever asked to do that, I probably would not be working at that type of company, because certainly they exist, but that's not really where my values align. And I can only, I have a microphone here, so I can only share my own experience. I'm sure that there are listeners who are like, oh no, I've had to do that. Or yeah, I agree, I would never want to do that. So it's easy for me to say that I'm lucky I can go and I can find another job if someone were to ask me to do that. But I'm also lucky, I think, in some ways that I've never had to. But I know when you and I first spoke that you have very strong opinions that these things, when people are terminated for nefarious reasons or as a way to cover up other things, because we do know it happens. We see these lawsuits come about all the time. So there's no denying that. My point here is that it does, I think, send this message or create this stigma that is the case in all companies. So I know I kind of want to get into this concept and idea that you have around really HR's purpose, because I obviously am of the belief that as a practitioner, there are some times where unfortunately I have to terminate someone, but I'm of the belief that those are for sound reasons or it's performance. Obviously that's a sound reason, or it's something that, from an execution standpoint, that I'm able to provide an empathetic approach. Now, I know from speaking with you, this is really what I want to get into, that there is a perception potentially that no matter who it is, like HR practitioners don't really care that much because this is just their job. So because we're talking about this, I want to hear from you directly. Like, what do you believe HR's purpose is in the workforce or in the workplace? And do you believe that there is a way for an HR practitioner actually to care about that person on the receiving end of a difficult conversation or a terminating conversation?
Alrighty. So a lot there.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to say that the people who in general work in HR are generally good people. I actually feel for them. A lot of times they want to do the right thing, and they're being pressured in a really nasty way by leadership to not do it. And their morals and values are compromised on a regular basis, and their choice is to leave and be unemployed and go find another place that may be the same way. So I truly do feel for HR. There's a lot of good people out there, and they just have one of the toughest jobs. They're squeezed in two or three different directions.
Yeah.
But ultimately, when push comes to shove, most of them, have to take care of themselves, as most people would do. And that's why this sort of farce of employment and HR exists in a lot of ways, and a lot of employees are left tricked as a result of it. As far as the purpose of HR, it's clear what the purpose is. It's just misrepresented as something different. It's represented that they're there to help resolve conflict. They're there to help employees navigate their employment, to make sure that they're treated fairly, and to help resolve disputes. That people should feel comfortable going to them and opening up and talking about things that are bothering them. And I could not disagree more with that. If you go to HR and open up and you're there's a complaint, there's an issue, there's something that they need to look into, you're creating work for them. You're creating friction. You're creating a problem that they need to take action to, especially if it's against senior leadership. I mean, 9 times out of 10, they are going to side with leadership every single time. And it may not appear on the surface that way, but 2-3 months down the road, all of a sudden you're getting pipped out of the blue and you're being let go and you're wondering what just happened. And the only thing that's different than when you were getting awards and performances 6 months ago is that you filed a complaint with HR. So, I mean, with me, I just think that, HR has a role and I respect the role. My biggest frustration is the lack of transparency, the trickery that people, the younger employees, I was this way. I went to HR my first couple of years out of work and that was an issue. And I went in there, I talked to them, I opened up, they were empathetic. Nothing ever happened. It was as if the conversation never even took place. But I have a feeling that the conversation did come back around to my manager and he knew it took place. And this is what happens. They work together. The HR business manager works in cahoots with your manager to manage you out of the business when the manager has decided they don't want you there anymore. Rather than being honest and transparent and coming to you and saying, hey, we appreciate you, we value you, you're an employee at will, whether you are or not. We've made a decision that it's time to let you go. But we respect and value, and we're going to treat you accordingly. We're going to give you the next couple of months to go find a job while you're still an employee, because it's a lot easier finding a job when you have a job. And you can decide to work or not. There's projects that you're working on you want to complete. There's deals that you're trying to close that you want to get that commission. Go ahead. If you don't want to do anything, that's fine too. If after that couple of months you haven't found a job, we're going to give you a severance package. It's going to be a fair and reasonable one, and then you go off. There's not an employee in the world that would not be forever grateful to that organization for treating them with that respect and transparency and decency that they deserve. Instead, they go on these campaigns. I mean, I've talked to people who worked at places for 32 years, 10 years, 20 years. And just in order to save a little bit of money on severance, to manage them out of the business so you don't pay unemployment or a severance, they literally wipe away years or decades of positive relations, work that they're proud of, things that they reflect back positively on. And that is all wiped away in a matter of a couple of months as they manage you out of the business, wrongfully terminate you to save you a little bit of money, rather than being honest and transparent with you.
As an HR professional, I know that managing HR for a workforce comes with its challenges, and managing a global workforce even more so. Using multiple tools for different countries and employee types complicates everything. Costs go up, efficiency goes down. You get the picture. Deal is here to change that. That's DEEL. Whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or anything in between, Deal simplifies global team management, payroll, hiring, and more. Deal HR streamlines your global operations with built-in compliance to lower costs and maximize efficiency. With self-service onboarding, new hires can be up and running in minutes. Sign documents, track expenses, and approve PTO in seconds. Plus, with Deal, you can easily oversee global cost reviews, headcount, and more with centralized reporting. Ready to see how Deal HR can transform your global operations for free? Head to deal.com to book a demo today. That's DEEL.com.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing your opinions on this. It's, I know that there are probably listeners who are like really annoyed hearing your opinion, but that's okay. I think it's really important that we hear from someone that doesn't fully believe in the things that we probably believe in. So there are some things that I agree with you on. There are some things that I think just fortunately because of my experience, I disagree with you on. Now, the things that I agree with you on are that there needs to be transparency. People would be forever grateful if they were clearer on where they actually stood performance-wise with an organization, or if there was an impending termination coming. I know I would appreciate that. And I know I think probably everyone would appreciate that. So I totally, totally agree with that. And I think most of where HR gets it wrong, and leaders in general get it wrong, is when they think that being transparent is going to bite them in the end or in the moment, rather than seeing that as a way to actually just be, a decent human being about what is eventually going to impact someone's, circumstances. Now, obviously, there's always going to be a caveat to every situation, whether it's something with confidentiality or whatever. But in most cases, I do agree that transparency is where a lot of these things are not even issues. Because if someone's like, hey, this isn't going to work out. Like, I don't even want to put you on a PIP. I think you should just know that this is not going to work and you should take this as notice. To me, I don't see any problem with that. As an HR practitioner, I've done that. And I've suggested to leaders to do that with people that they've had to manage out. Now,
how about why it's not going to work out?
Well, to me, I think that's part of the conversation. I'll give you an example. And this is also where I think I'll share where on some levels I disagree with some of your perspective, but this is really because of my own experience. I can only speak about my own experience. But I have had in the past employees who I really, considered friends and still consider friends whose performance was not good and it wasn't improving. And there had been, hey, we need more of this, we need more of that, like just general conversations with the manager, right? And I've been an HR business partner. That's kind of how I see my role in general as an HR practitioner. And I would sometimes step in and say, listen, as a friend, you've got to know that, unless something dramatically changes with your performance, something is going to dramatically change about your employment. And you should know, like, that's probably like, it's not going to really change unless something 180 changes. And I can say with 100% honesty that I've had those conversations before, and people generally are like, thanks, I'm going to go and find another job, or, oh crap, I'm going to have to do a much better job because now I know I'm about to get fired. So I have had the fortune of having managers who have been supportive of me having those types of conversations. And I think I've learned from HR practitioners who do challenge some of the things that you have seen. Now, the places where I would say I disagree are that I do think that HR is placed in most companies, although of course we know that there are companies who don't ever do the right thing and are really the building blocks of these stigmas. But I do think my role specifically, and the roles of many of my colleagues, is to provide support through conflict and to resolve problems. And that is not seen as work created, and rather it's an opportunity to help build that person up and resolve conflict in the workplace. I do believe that. I can understand that there are obviously these stigmas because there's a farce, and there are some people who don't live up to what I believe we should be doing in the workplace. That said, I think anyone listening who is in HR, I hope that they don't just do things because they think that's what they're supposed to do. I hope that they take critical thinking and reasoning to their jobs every single day and challenge people if they want them to do the wrong things. But again, it's easy for me to say because that's the type of person that I am. If someone asks me to do the wrong thing, and I'll give you one last story before I let you share what you might have on your mind. I had an experience with one of the worst leaders I've ever worked with years ago, who specifically asked me to basically scrub the engagement survey results for this like annual company survey. And this leader, this was probably like 8 years ago already, so it's not someone that I luckily work with anymore. And this particular leader was like, don't ask those people to take the survey because they're going to respond poorly about me. And the people that already took the survey, let's have them sign in as those people and take the survey. And I was like, are you out of your freaking mind? I'm not doing that. And we literally, I kid you not, if this might be the first time this is heard on the podcast, we got into a screaming match. Like, I was actually screaming and she was actually screaming at me. I was like, you're not asking me to do that. And by the way, I did report her. And she eventually was not working for the company anymore. This is probably the first time I've shared this on this podcast. I felt so strongly that she was asking me to do something not only that was nefarious, obviously, but clearly wrong. And also, to me, something that totally took advantage of employees. We should hear from everyone. If this is a survey for the entire company, we've got to hear from everyone. So that's an example of where hopefully I'm not alone in being able to feel confident and strong enough to say, no, you're wrong and I'm not listening to you. But obviously, not everyone is able to do that. So I'll pause. I shared a lot there, and I know I saw you taking notes, so I'm sure you want to respond to some.
If I can read them, I'll respond to them. I mean, there's just so much to unpack here. I mean, first of all, I appreciate you sharing your experience. When I started this, I had no expectation of what I was finding. I didn't even start this myself. I just started posting about topics on LinkedIn, and the community forced me to start this practice. They pleaded with me to start this practice. So, I mean, I don't know. Where do I want to start here? Why is it when employees are let go, these same people who were trusted, who respected, who were valued, are instantly treated like a criminal? That they're literally they're having their system shut down in the middle of the termination call. They're having to complete it on a phone call. They're walked out of the office, but yet 24 hours later, they were sharing confidential information. I mean, it's just the employer is the one who creates this toxic environment, this combative stance that leaves employees walking away feeling horrible. And this is the last thing that they want them to feel. I mean, I
think with that specifically, this, you're probably not going to like this response, but I do think that is a reflection of someone, like one person creating this circumstance for everyone else. Because let's take an example of someone who tries to then download confidential client information or something, right? Like then it becomes this, we have to shut off systems for everyone so they don't have access to those things. I fully agree with you. It becomes this
so the reason why these things happen, the reason these things happen is because the employees are being blindsided with these terminations. And that's exactly what the employer wants. If they were being treated with respect and dignity as they have given throughout their tenure, then there wouldn't be a concern about it. So we're basically saying that every employee who's ever worked for you is a scumbag who's looking to steal stuff from you and screw you over. And therefore, because one person might have done it at some other company, we're going to treat every employee like this? I mean, aren't you saying the same thing right now, that one bad company doesn't mean that all companies are bad?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Unfortunately, I think in a world where competition, I mean, you have a sales background also, competition is if you can have a leg up on the competition, you can make a ton of money. And that's whether you're an individual or a business. And so I really fundamentally, from a values perspective, I agree with you. People have to be treated with dignity and respect just as they came in the way that they go. And I believe that the people who are offboarding off of a company should be treated the same way that they were treated when they were onboarding, even if they did something that earned them a termination, like they harassed someone or they stole or whatever. People are still people, and you have to treat them kindly.
The other thing I want to talk about is this thing about performance, right? So, and about managers and about PIPs. I think it's an obligation of the manager to be communicating with their employees on a regular basis. That the employee should never be blindsided if there's a concern with performance. That there should never be a need for a PIP. If the manager is doing their job throughout, the employee should already know that they're not performing well.
Absolutely.
And that they likely should be moving on. But that's 99 out of 100 times, that's never the case. The manager doesn't do their job. They don't interact on a regular basis. They just give commands and nitpicks and complaints, not support and guidance. And then when things start to go bad, then it's all on the employee. It's never on the manager. And now they're being given an unrealistic time period to improve on it.
So
you mentioned performance. Performance is almost in every instance, it's being positioned as subjective. I mean, despite the fact that there's hard, fast KPIs, most PIPs are filled with subjective criteria that a majority of them that the employee has never been asked to do. And it's intended to manage you out of the business. So that if you can beat the real number that they purposely make unachievable, maybe you got a bluebird and somehow got lucky. Well, now we can micromanage you to death on these subjective things while you're on this PIP. And then if you beat the real number, we can terminate you because you didn't pass these micromanagement subjective items that would have taken you away from actually getting the job done in the first place. I mean, do you know that I literally say the same thing to almost every single person I speak to that comes to me on a PIP? And I don't even let them talk. I tell them this is what's going on. They're like, oh my God, how did you literally just describe word for word what I'm experiencing? It's the modus operandi.
Example. No, it's a great example actually for where HR leaders can be best supporting employees. Because, for example, when a manager is not doing the right thing and they're like, okay, well, this person's not working out, I just want to manage them out. That's when it's appropriate for the HR partner to say, no, how many conversations have you had with this person? Do they know where they stand? And and this is really like, for those listening who are in HR, this is, if you are not doing this with your managers, you are part of the problem. You've got to have these conversations with people so that people are not surprised. And also with the PIPs, I totally agree. If you're planning to manage someone out and they can do nothing to improve their performance, just tell them that, provide them a very reasonable severance rather than making them go through hoops to eventually not even show that their performance has improved enough.
I'm like bursting at the seams here.
I know,
so,
tell me.
So you say provide them a severance. Do you know what the new thing is that I just kind of became aware of in the last year? I've now seen like 100 times.
Oh God.
It's they come to you and they tell you that, we're not happy with your performance. We're going to put you on this. We're going to give you a choice. You can choose to go on this unachievable PIP that you don't deserve to be on. And we're purposely making it so that there's not a chance that you can pass it. If you ask your manager, on the side of your mouth, they'll tell you that you're gone already. Or you can choose, see how I emphasize that word choose? You can choose this severance. But you know what? You chose it. So it's not a severance. It's not a termination. It's a mutual resignation that you're initiating. That you're initiating. That is not your desire, not your intent, that you're being pressured by your employer to make this choice between two horrible outcomes, and you don't even, and you're blindsided by it. You don't even know where it's coming from. And now you're being told you got till the end of the day, you've got 24 hours to choose whether you want this unachievable PIP that we've dressed up as impossible to achieve, or you can accept a severance that we intentionally mislead you, that you'll now find out when you apply for unemployment in a month that you're not eligible for it. That's what they do instead of if you don't want to be on the PIP.
Well, that's interesting. First of all, as from a selfish perspective, as like an individual taking the HR hat off, if someone were ever to offer that to me, I'd be like, manage me out so that you're going to still provide me a severance. I'm going to have 30 more days of pay and I'll be eligible for unemployment. But the thing is, most
employees don't know this is happening.
No,
I literally get on the phone with them and I can tell you that 19 out of 20 people that are going through this have no idea what I just told them.
Wow.
They are shocked and disgusted that this company that they worked for years for is using these underhanded tactics to trick them into a resignation that they're dressing up as a termination with a severance.
That's bad. Here's the thing. If someone, I could see, trying to think like with some nuance here and I guess using my own critical thinking advice, I could see if someone is really actually not performing and they've had discussions, let's say, and it's been overt and transparent. And the company is like, look, either we can manage you out over the next 30 days, or we can just call it now and we won't fight unemployment. I could see that if a company is being reasonable, because to me, I think unemployment is a major concern for most people. And a lot of people don't realize that if they resign, they most of the time are not eligible for unemployment. And
Correct.
This is where, like, if someone has a really good HR partner, they can say, will I be eligible for unemployment? But what you're saying, and kind of what I'm saying too, is that if people don't have that savviness about them, or they don't have someone being honest with them, they don't know.
They're being purposely misled, literally.
That's
when you hear severance, you think termination, unemployment.
Yeah.
Believe me, if they actually said to you, well, you can go on a PIP or you can choose to resign, why aren't they saying what it really is? They're purposely not, to intentionally trick people into screwing themselves over and not having unemployment when they thought they were going to get it. And they're purposely giving them misinformation to make those decisions on.
Yeah,
I mean, the same thing. It goes with it applies with so many things. I mean, we've talked about this before. I mean, employment agreements of which you could be a person of color with a disability, in a protected class, with a veteran, with whatever it is. And they make you sign an employment agreement that says that you're an employee at will and can be terminated any time for any reason. It's not true. The comp plans that they make you sign, that they'll literally threaten to withhold earned compensation that's illegal to do, previously earned, that they'll threaten to withhold that if you don't sign this comp plan. But in the back, so they give you this perception that it's a legal binding contract that both parties will abide by. But in the back of the contract, it says that the employer can change the terms of this agreement at any time with or without notice or consent. So how is it a legal contract? It's not. By definition, it's not. You know, severance
we
agreements.
Need an attorney on here so we can hash this out too. What I will say is that I think it's like 48 states that have this at will.
49.
49. Right. So at will, and I've said this to listeners too, the at will law doesn't mean that you can just terminate anyone. And to your point, this is really what you're saying, that you can't just let someone go. You know, there has to be a justification when you terminate someone, even in an at-will state.
Only if you're in a protected class.
Well, most people are of a protected class. Everyone has a gender. If you have to prove discriminations, everyone has some affiliation to any of the protected classes, right? Someone could prove. The difficulty is proving discrimination. This is where people find themselves in a bit of a pickle, because a company that's doing nefarious things can say, oh, sorry, we're terminating you. No notice, no care in the world, no empathy, fine. Now they know, those companies doing the wrong thing know that it's extremely difficult to prove discrimination and wrongful termination unless there's an abundance of clarity and written documentation and all of this stuff that people can support their argument for. But to your point, and what I'm trying to say here too, is that just because you're in an at-will state doesn't mean that you can just terminate anyone willy-nilly. I don't believe that to be the case. Now, obviously, the law in those states allows and is kind of like employer heavy, because it allows the employer to make business decisions more freely. But again, there has to be, if you ask me from like an HR perspective, there has to be a reason why you're terminating someone. For example, if a company is going through a RIF, which is a reduction in force, for those who might not know, there has to be a process to determine who is part of that RIF. Either you're looking at numbers and performance, or you're looking at last in, first out. Like, there has to be some sort of justification. It can't be this person's worked for us the longest, this person's the oldest, this person, like, that's where you come into discrimination territory. So that said, obviously I'm not an attorney. There are places within the laws that people take advantage, and then there are places within the laws where people are abundantly conservative. Like we see in California and New York, which are extremely litigious states and states that tend to lean toward in favor of the employee. There are more protections in those states for employees. But in other states like Florida, Texas, and some states throughout the Midwest, like, those protections are not necessarily there. So employees really, unfortunately, do have to be very knowledgeable when they are engaging in any type of relationship with an employer to really know what their rights are. I think we're kind of saying the same thing, but unfortunately, a lot of people don't know. And I think that's where it's really great that you are helping people as they are navigating these things in their careers and in their experiences, which takes me to probably one of my last questions for you, because I've probably made you totally lose your mind at this point on the podcast.
Not at all.
Okay, good. When we think about layoffs and the separation agreements and the severance and all of that, when you are advising people on how to navigate those things to make the most of those moments and really squeeze the lemon for all of its juice, what do you typically advise? Because, by the way, for anyone listening, if you ever do see a separation agreement, you have time to review it. Do not let anyone pressure you. And especially if you're over the age of 40, in certain states, you have an extra long period of time to review. But anyway, Dan, going back to that question, what do you typically advise?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify a few things. So
yeah.
When you're under 40, they can give you as little time as they want to review the agreement. They can pressure you to say, hey, you have until the end of the day or else you don't have it. Now, whether that's right to do or not, they have no legal obligation to offer severance. When you're over 40, they have an obligation to give you 21 days to review it and 7 days to revoke it if you're laid off by yourself. If you're terminated with just one other person, it's considered a group layoff, and you're allowed 45 days to review it and 7 days to revoke it.
I think the caveat is California. I think under 40, they have a certain minimum. But anyway, yes, there
I
are.
don't think so.
I think we'll have to look.
I don't know. I've worked with 100 people from California that had these issues, and I have not come across that. So you may be right. There's a lot of one-off laws in 50 states all over the place. So
yeah, it's like San
absolutely.
Francisco versus California on the whole. But anyway, go ahead, please.
I think I just lost my train of thought there.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
You were clarifying the point on time to review, and then I had asked you what you typically advise.
Yeah. I mean, you want to basically be honest with yourself and with the company. Assess what really went on here. I mean, companies do have a right to let employees go. There are plenty of employees that perform poorly and deserve to be let go. So be honest with yourself. And there's a lot of instances where companies are acting poorly and targeting employees and terminating them, and who don't deserve to be. And in those instances, stand up for yourself. In general, when it comes to severance, most employees either don't know that you can negotiate it, don't know how to go about it, don't want to be bothered with it, are too traumatized about what happened, have already moved on to the next job and want to leave it behind them. So as a result, most employers do not offer what they're willing to pay if you can put together a compelling reason why it's in their best interest to offer more. And what I'm talking about is basically finding some meat on the bones, being able to articulate in a strong, assertive way, perhaps wrongdoing that took place that led to your termination, whether it was a toxic work environment, retaliation, targeting, compensation theft, discrimination. There's lots of different, what I call my buckets of wrongdoing. And you can build out your facts and details of what you endured and have that ready to present, to use as a motivation and leverage to negotiate a better offer. The National Labor Relations Board ruled in February of 2023 that non-disparagement agreements are no longer offered or allowed in severance agreements. I've probably looked at 1,000 severance agreements in that time period. I've seen one that proactively addressed it correctly and clearly. I've seen, probably 100 that, kind of just referred to the change in law, but didn't say what it was or where to find it. So, you see what I'm saying? So employees, if you're not in a managerial position, you're not considered a highly paid employee, you have the right to share your truthful experience. You have no obligation to hide wrongdoing by the employer. And if people realize that, think that if I sign my severance, they're buying my silence. They're not. And employers need to make advocates of their employees, make fans of their employees. There's no better word of mouth advertisement than a former employee saying what a great company it is and how well they treated me when I left.
So true.
It's so easy to do. It takes so little to do the right thing. And, that stays with the employee, both good and bad. And what you don't want to do is create a long line of enemies of former employees that have a grind with you and want to see you fail. So treat them with dignity and respect. Take care of them. Value the time that they put in, and be honest and transparent. And if they're no good, then manage them properly throughout their tenure. Don't blindside them and then now put all the onus on them to improve all of a sudden like that when they haven't been doing a good job the whole time and you haven't communicated with them.
Right.
So
I agree 100%. It costs nothing to be kind, as they say. And I think, the more honest and transparent we can be, and that we are, the better off everyone is in every circumstance. And the truest thing that has been said is that the best case scenario is that you have people leaving a company feeling really warm about their experience and being converted into fans of the company who want to see the company prosper, and the people that make the company prosper continue to prosper too. I agree 100%. You don't want a line of enemies standing outside of your door at all. So if anything, those listening, I hope that you were able to have some of your deeply held beliefs maybe turned on their heads a bit. Maybe you felt a little challenged. Maybe you felt like you were totally aligned with Dan. Maybe you've actually had your own experiences where you've dealt with difficult circumstances. Dan, do you want to say anything on that?
I have consulted with probably close to a dozen HR professionals, chief people officers, VPs, DEI folks. I'm telling you, it happens to everybody. Presidents of companies, chief revenue officers, VPs, HR people. I will tell you one thing. Every person I've worked with in HR has had a highly successful outcome. They know where all the bodies are buried. They know all the underhanded tactics that employers use, and they use this information in their argument back to get a better offer.
Wow. Well, they're lucky to have you supporting them, but I had a feeling you were going to mention this because I personally know people who have been burned, who are in HR and have been burned by companies that don't do the right thing consistently. So I think, as I said at the top of our recording, I think it's a wonderful thing when people have mentors and advocates and people on their side, whether in or outside of the business. So thank you for supporting employees when maybe some of our colleagues are not doing that to begin with. So with that, Dan, if someone wants to learn more about you or have a conversation, or maybe they need your support, where can they find you and connect?
Yeah, I mean, I live every day, all day long in LinkedIn in my DM box. I've got a website. I've got a type form that people fill out that they can seek help or assistance across 8 different practice areas. You'll go to a specific type form for that specific practice area. My website is dangoodmanea.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. Dan Goodman Employment Advisory is also on LinkedIn. I post twice every day about topics that people need to hear about. If you're an employee, I post every day at 8:23 and 6:53 at night. I'm not going anywhere. I'm having the time of my life. It's the most impactful work of my life. And awesome. Every day is a joy. And I'm helping people every day. And I feel and see the impact every day. So I'm blessed.
Amazing. That's amazing. Well, congratulations on all of your success. And thank you for bringing some really interesting discussion to the podcast. Really appreciate your time. And we'll have all of those links in the show notes for everyone to easily click as well. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you for having me. It was a great time.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.